I'm about to dash through a whole lot of very important history. Forgive me. At the end of the 15th century, the 1400s, the great centers of Renaissance art, Flanders in the north, Florence in the south, were invaded by expanding national empires. Even Rome was invaded both by France and the Holy Roman Empire. Spain, enriched by gold from the New World, became Europe's wealthiest power. Stay tuned. Meanwhile, the commercial revolution continued apace as wealthy merchants took advantage of expanding worldwide trade, new inventions, and the reintroduction of a money economy. So the base of patronage expanded. The church still commissioned a lot of art, at least until Protestants grew suspicious of church decoration, when church patronage fell off pretty dramatically in the north. But a rising middle class clamored for portraits, for landscapes, and for still lifes or genre paintings, paintings of everyday life. Today we're traveling north from Italy to what we call Germany. But at this point in our story, what would become Germany, as well as chunks of what would become Italy, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic, and a few other countries as well, were part of the huge Holy Roman Empire. In this lecture, we're also heading into the Reformation and the Age of Religious Wars, but not just yet. This work was completed the year before Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses, or criticisms of the Catholic Church, to the wall of a church in Wittenberg, Germany, and ignited the Protestant Reformation. It is a very Catholic work, and therefore it serves as a useful contrast. The two towering figures of the German Renaissance are the Catholic Matthias Grunewald and the Protestant Albrecht Durer. We will begin with Grunewald. Matthias Grunewald was court painter to the Archbishop of Mainz and created this altarpiece for a monastic order. The altarpiece was placed in the choir of a church adjacent to the hospital. That is why it features saints associated with disease, especially St. Anthony, the patron saint of the order. And this is why its narrative message hones in on miraculous healings and the danger of ignoring God's judgment. Grunewald was a master of the new oil medium, so as you look at this work, pay special attention to how he uses color subtly to model his figures, and shockingly to create contrast between good and evil and the saved and the damned. Here you see the closed altarpiece with its supporting predella, and that's a term you need to know. The closed altarpiece has images of St. Anthony and St. Sebastian on either wing, portrayed as painted sculpture. On the predella, we see Mary and her dead son, a pietà, just after a deposition or removal of Christ from the cross, more terms you should know. Note that John the Baptist appears on the other side of the cross from Mary and St. John. Of course, John the Baptist was already dead at the time of the crucifixion, but Grunewald has chosen to make him symbolically present, pointing to the salvation that he had proclaimed. Sacra Conversazione is a term for paintings that portray biblical figures or saints interacting with each other even though they were not alive at the same time. We also see the lamb carrying a cross, another symbol of Christ's sacrifice. These, by the way, are among the elements that will disappear from Protestant Christian art. Protestants did not generally portray non-biblical saints, and they tended to be persnickety about scriptural details. They were also less inclined to employ symbolism or to paint chronologically challenged Sacra Conversaziones. The closed altarpiece presents one of the most vivid and gruesome depictions of Calvary in art history. Here's one close-up, and here's another. The Order of St. Anthony operated the hospital in Isenheim largely for those afflicted by a disease known then as St. Anthony's fire, caused by a fungus in rye and other cereals. Doctors now call this disease ergotism, and thankfully it's become rare. But in this era, periodic epidemics still erupted in Europe, where grains were often stored in damp conditions. St. Anthony's fire set off painful skin eruptions that blackened and turned gangrenous, often requiring amputation. The eruptions were accompanied by nervous spasms and convulsions, and many victims died from this disease. The monks treated victims with a balm made from herbs and other plants, and with prayers to St. Anthony, who was believed to possess miraculous curing powers. The monks also tried to bolster the faith of the sick by reminding them that Christ and St. Anthony as well had suffered even greater torments. So Grunewald's altarpiece played an important mystical and psychological role in the Isenheim treatment program. I know I've shown you this German Gothic image several times, but note how similar the expressive emotional language of this work is to Grunewald's altarpiece. I could easily imagine the College Board pairing these two works. Heavily emotional content and physical exaggeration will continue to appear in German art well into the 20th century. The outer wings of the Isenheim altarpiece were open for important festivals of the liturgical year, particularly those in honor of the Virgin Mary. The scenes from left to right are the Annunciation, a concert of angels, the Nativity, and finally on the right, the Resurrection. This is a computer-aided reconstruction, by the way. The piece is now displayed in a museum in its separate parts so that all of it can be viewed at the same time. So, hooray for Photoshop. Let's focus in on this extraordinary depiction of the Resurrection, a scene that relatively few painters have attempted to capture. So what techniques has Grunewald used to portray this central, but again, hard to paint, moment in the Christian narrative? Well, obviously there is a very vivid use of color. Note that Grunewald has applied layers of paint to give the scene an almost translucent glow. The use of juxtaposed complementary colors, orange and blue, likewise focuses our attention on the contrast between earthly life and the resurrected life. The painting adds drama, too, with that tumbled soldiers at the bottom, whom the resurrection has thrust to the ground. And now we come to another turning point in our course as we introduce a new medium, printmaking. The invention that more than any other ushered in the Protestant Reformation, and for that matter, transformed history, was the printing press. It not only spread knowledge and revolutionary ideas, such as the notion that people could read and interpret the Bible for themselves, but the printing press also created new markets for art in forms that could be reproduced. Here's the first major book printed with movable type in Europe, the Gutenberg Bible. Although illustrated printed Bibles would soon follow, these illuminations were actually added by hand. You are going to need to keep these various kinds of printing straight, eventually. For now, we're going to focus on the two types of printmaking that appear in this artistic period and among your required works. On the left, you see a woodblock print created by the most famous print artist of all time, and probably also the most famous German painter, Albrecht Durer. The work on the right is required. It is an engraving rather than a woodcut, and note how much more detail the artist can include. I hope you watched the podcast about Durer's paintings and read the essay on our Durer required work, which I'll get to in a moment. But first, let's watch another Khan Academy video, this one a more general discussion of woodcuts and engraving. Pay attention to the advantages and disadvantages of each method. Note that the allegory of law and grace, our final required work for this unit, is a woodcut. Durer's paintings have dropped off the list, which distressed me since I think he's one of the greatest painters in art history. Durer was the Leonardo da Vinci of the Northern Renaissance and Reformation. Like some of his Italian Renaissance counterparts, he was the son and apprentice of a goldsmith, but as a teenager he turned to making woodcuts for the booming new publishing industry. But Durer was also a humanist scholar, a mathematician, a scientist, and a superbly skilled self-promoter who actually made serious money from his art. Durer took 2 long trips to Italy and made friends with many of our Italian high Renaissance superstars, including Raphael. So he helped bring Italian Renaissance mathematical perspective and humanist learning to Germany. But he remained a very northern figure, especially when he embraced Protestantism in the last decade of his life. This wonderful woodcut is so famous and such a longtime College Board favorite that I'm including it even though it is not a required work. The woodcut has hundreds of individually carved lines. The carving would usually be done by a skilled craftsman working from the artist's drawings, but we know that Durer, again trained as a goldsmith, sometimes did his own carving as well. The theme comes from the book of Revelation, and the 4 disasters are death, famine, war, and pestilence or disease. Death is the emaciated old man. Famine is swinging the scales of away human souls. War wields a sword, and pestilence or disease draws a bow. This engraving, not a woodcut, of Adam and Eve, which is a required work, highlights Durer's extraordinary skill as an engraver. Cross-hatching, again, is the use of perpendicular lines to convey volume and modeling, or crossed lines at any rate. Here we see Adam grasping the tree of life. The plaque hanging from the branch has Durer's signature in Latin. The branch Adam holds is mountain ash, the tree of life, while Eve has broken off a branch of the fig, the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. 4 of the animals represent the medieval idea that all individuals displayed one of 4 human temperaments. The cat is choleric, that is, independent, decisive, and goal-oriented. The rabbit is sanguine, enthusiastic, active, and social. The ox is phlegmatic, relaxed, peaceful, quiet, and the elk is melancholic, analytical, detail-oriented, and deep-thinking. Who would have guessed that elk were deep thinkers? What this image is expressing is that before the fall, these humors or personal tendencies were held in check. They were controlled by the innocence of man. Once Adam and Eve ate from the apple of knowledge, all 4 of these temperaments were activated and innocence was lost. So humans of different temperaments began to clash, and individuals gave in to the worst elements of their natures. Sin had entered the world. The nude showed the profound Italian influence on Durer's work. Most Northern Renaissance and certainly most Reformation works do not depict nudes. Durer was also influenced by classical sculpture, and like Michelangelo, he based his Adam on the ancient sculpture of Apollo Belvedere. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the Apollo Belvedere. Remember that this sculpture also had a significant influence on Michelangelo. Like Polyclitus, like Leonardo da Vinci, Durer believed that the perfect human form corresponded to a precise system of proportion and measurements. Near the end of his life, he wrote several books codifying these theories. Here we see clearly his fascination with ideal form. The first man and first woman appear in nearly symmetrical idealized poses, each with the weight on one leg, the other leg bent, and each with one arm angled slightly upward from the elbow and somewhat away from the body. Remember the terms for the relaxed posture and balance of opposites? Contrapposto and symmetria. These details give you a sense of Durer's complete mastery of engraving. I find the cat's fur especially impressive. And here are 2 more famous Durer engravings. I could really imagine one of these showing up as an attribution question. Now, I've been rather skirting around the topic of the Reformation. In this course, we'll be looking mostly at the Reformation's influence on art, but I want you to watch a segment of the Crash Course Introduction to the Reformation so you aren't left completely in the dark about this important historical event. So we just saw one of Cranach's many portraits of Martin Luther. Here is our next required work, a woodcut illustrating the difference between Catholic and Protestant notions of salvation, presented in a way, I should note, that is not especially fair to Catholic teaching. Luther, as you just saw, believed that Christians are saved by faith, or God's free grace alone, while Catholics believed and still believe that salvation comes through both faith and works, or good deeds. You know what an allegory is, right? It means using symbols or narratives to convey hidden meaning. This kind of simple, even propagandistic woodcut helped spread Protestant beliefs. Eventually, as we'll see in the next unit, the Catholic Church used art to fight back. You saw the painting version in the Khan Academy essay. The woodcut based on the painting would reach a much larger audience. Cranach was a close friend of Luther's. He was actually best man at his wedding, and his art played a major role in publicizing and popularizing Luther's ideas. The left side of the composition shows Adam and Eve below a dying tree, indicating that sin has entered the world. A skeleton and a fearsome creature prod a naked man into the depths of hell as Moses and a group of prophets point to the tablets of the law held by a figure that appears to be Luther himself. Cranach consistently depicted Luther and other reformers in his portraits alongside biblical figures. On the right, John the Baptist directs a naked man toward both Christ on the cross and to the risen Christ in the upper right. So, was Moses misguided? On the contrary, Cranach is demonstrating Luther's belief that the law is essential to salvation, not because humans can ever fulfill the law, but because the law makes them aware of their sinfulness and their need to accept Christ's grace. The work is meant to be read from left to right, with the left side sending the message that the law prepares believers for the gospel, and the right saying that salvation comes solely from faith in the risen Christ. Here we see another side of Durer's extraordinary drawing and painting skills, and a demonstration of his interest in natural science. I love this painting, so I had to stick it in. This painting reveals not only Durer's skills as a portraitist, but also his Reformation theology and the heavy influence of high Renaissance Italian painting on Durer's work. Note that St. John in the red robe really overshadows St. Peter, the fellow with the beard holding his famous keys to the kingdom over the Bible, not over a pope or over St. Peter's Cathedral. But not all Protestants shared Durer's conservatism or his love of religious imagery. Radical Protestants found images idolatrous and often destroyed great works in a fit of religious zeal. This painting depicts radical Protestants looting Zurich churches in 1562. You may remember the image of Byzantine iconoclasm from Unit 5. Unit 6. Note that term iconoclasm. It's back. I'm going to stop here so that I don't choke YouTube. In my final lecture for this unit, I will talk all too briefly about later Netherlandish painting and our final required work.